The scent of incense lingered thick in the air, mingling with the smoky breath of firecrackers and the steady hum of whispered blessings. I stood beneath a crimson veil, my hands clasped in front of me, wrapped in embroidered silk the color of good fortune. The courtyard bustled with distant relatives, loud laughter, and the clang of cymbals. I was the bride, Liam's bride, but I felt like an ornament set out for display. They said I was lucky. Lucky to marry a soldier, one of the strong, patriotic men who defended the motherland. Liam returned from the northern border just 2 weeks ago, and our marriage was arranged within days. My parents beamed with pride. Theirs was a daughter, chosen by a state hero. I had only met him 3 times before today. I remember the first time. He looked at me once, not in the eyes, but just enough to assess me like a farmer inspecting a harvest. His words were few, and his voice stiff, always measured. He was tall, with a sun-browned face and eyes that never lingered. My mother whispered that he was simply shy. My heart, still soft with girlish dreams, wanted to believe it. On the day of the wedding, we bowed before heaven and earth, to our parents, and then to each other. But when I turned toward Liam, veil still covering my face, he only tilted his head perfunctorily, as if he were saluting a superior officer. His hands were cold when they brushed against mine for the tea ceremony. He did not smile. He had not smiled once the entire day. That night, after the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered like sleepy stars, I sat on the edge of our marriage bed. My hairpins had been removed, my veil folded neatly by the bedside. Liam stood by, the window, still in his stiff green uniform, looking out into the darkness. I asked him softly, "Do you want me to help you change?" He didn't answer for a long time. "No," he finally said, without turning around. That first night, we didn't touch. He slept with his back to me, and though the bed was wide, it felt narrower than a coffin. I stared at the red silk above us. Its dragons and phoenixes now looked garish and mocking. I counted the breaths between us and wondered if that space would ever shrink. Days passed, then weeks. Liam left early each morning, returning after dusk. He brought no stories home, no fondness, not even irritation. Only silence. He read newspapers. He polished his boots. I learned the shape of his routine, but not the shape of his heart. I tried to be the wife my mother had trained me to be. I cooked his favorite dishes, pressed his uniforms, even embroidered his name into the collar of his undershirts. He never commented, never thanked me. Sometimes I caught him staring blankly at the wall while the radio played patriotic anthems. I could not tell if he was lost in memories or merely numb. One evening, I asked him gently, "Do you miss the army more than home?" He replied after a pause, "There is no difference." I did not cry. Not then. But later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the red wedding paper cuttings still pasted on the windows, now fading with time. I traced the dragon with my fingertip and whispered to no one, "Then what am I to you?" There was no answer, only the wind outside and the ticking of the wall clock. The days grew colder as autumn pressed its gray hand upon the village. The red lanterns from our wedding still clung stubbornly to the eaves, faded now, their tassels tangled by wind and dust. I had almost taken them down, but my mother-in-law said sharply, "Leave them. Maybe if they hang long enough, some luck will come to this house." She never said my name. To her, I was always this girl or that wife. I tried to please her. I woke before dawn to sweep the courtyard, kneaded dough with aching fingers, fetched water from the well with arms too thin for the task. Still, her eyes followed me like a hawk, always searching for something to disapprove of. One afternoon, I brought tea to the sitting room. Liam was home for a rare midday break, seated on the worn wooden bench with his arms crossed, eyes lowered, always too quiet. His mother sat beside him, shelling peanuts into a bowl. Her voice sliced through the calm like a blade. "Tell me, son," she said, loud enough for me to hear as I entered. "What kind of bride doesn't do her duty on the wedding night? What kind of woman hides under a red veil and then turns her back on her husband? Cold like a stone. Maybe she thinks she's better than us." The teacups in my hands rattled slightly. I lowered the tray to the table with as much grace as I could summon, keeping my face still. Liam said nothing. He didn't look at me, didn't look at his mother. His silence burned more than the words. His mother continued, undeterred. "In my day, a wife knew what the marriage bed was for. No man should come home to such emptiness. Maybe she's still a child. Or worse, she doesn't want you at all." The words slithered through my ears like poison. I felt the heat rise to my face, shame sticking to my skin like humidity. I bowed my head slightly. "I'm sorry," I murmured. His mother scoffed. "Sorry doesn't give me grandchildren." I didn't wait for more. I stepped out, hands trembling, holding back tears until I was out of sight. I went into the small garden and sat behind the stack of firewood, where no one would see. I thought he would defend me, even a small word, but he didn't. He never did. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for months, was what happened after I left the room. Liam set the bowl of peanuts down and turned to his mother. His voice was flat but hard, like river stone. "Don't speak to her like that again." His mother blinked. "I'm only telling the truth. She's your daughter-in-law, not your servant. I won't have you shame her in front of me." She narrowed her eyes. "So you finally care?" He stood. "I don't need to explain myself. But if you have a problem with her, bring it to me. Don't humiliate her." And with that, he left the room. But he never told me. That night, he came to bed late. He lay beside me without touching, without speaking. I lay still, facing the wall, thinking of his silence during his mother's taunts. In my heart, I told myself, he won't stand up for me, not even now. I didn't see the flicker of his eyes in the dark, or the way he stayed awake longer than usual, turning something over silently in his heart. The colder it got, the quieter our home became. I moved through the days like a ghost in red slippers, leaving no mark behind. I no longer tried to impress my mother-in-law, no matter how well I cooked the rice or folded Liam's uniform. Her lips remained tight, her eyes full of quiet disdain. And Liam, he was a figure in the corner of my life. Present, but unreachable. Rarely looked at him now. Not because I didn't want to, but because it hurt too much to meet his eyes and find nothing there. I began sleeping closer to the edge of the bed. Not dramatically, not to make a point. It just happened, inch by inch. The space between us became another silence in our home, just like the untouched teacups or the unopened letters on the table from his army friends. Sometimes when I walked past the bedroom at night, I would find him sitting on the edge of the bed, half undressed, staring at his boots, as if they were easier to talk to than I was. What I didn't know was this. Liam watched me, quietly. Not with desire or hunger, but with something more fragile, more confused. He noticed how I rubbed my wrist when I was nervous, how I tied my apron tighter when I was angry, how I bit my lip when his mother snapped at me, then said nothing. He saw it all, and it unsettled him. He had learned how to march, how to shoot, how to follow orders, but he had never learned how to be kind. No one had taught him what to say to a girl who looked like she was fading in her own home. And though he liked me, in his quiet, wordless way, he didn't know how to give shape to that feeling. One morning, I caught him staring. I was hanging wet clothes in the courtyard, steam rising from the freshly washed linen in the frosty air. My hair was pinned messily, My hands were raw from scrubbing. I glanced up and found him standing by the door, watching. Our eyes met for just a second. I looked away quickly, thinking I had imagined it. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then closed it and stepped back inside. That evening, I found a new pair of wool gloves on my pillow. No note, no explanation. Just the gloves, soft, warm, clearly expensive. I stared at them for a long time, unsure whether to be touched or insulted. Was it guilt? Pity? He said nothing about them at dinner. Neither did I. Later that night, lying in bed with the gloves still, untouched on the table, I whispered under my breath, "You don't even know me." He didn't answer. I thought he was asleep, but beside me, Liam blinked into the darkness, aching with the truth that I was right. He didn't know how to know. The letter arrived before sunrise, sealed with the red stamp of urgency. I found Liam already dressed when I woke, lacing up his boots in the dim gray light of the room. His army bag was packed, his uniform crisp and silent as always. I sat up slowly, still rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "You're leaving?" I asked, even though the answer sat heavily between us already. He nodded. "Orders, Northern Post, immediate." I pressed the blanket to my chest, unsure of what else to say. There was a pause between us, not just a moment, but the kind of silence that feels like a locked door no one dares touch. He looked at me then, truly looked, as if trying to memorize my face, though he said nothing of the kind. I got out of bed and helped him fasten his coat. His shoulders were tense, unmoving, like a mountain bracing for a storm. I straightened his collar. My fingers brushed his skin, and then, for a second, I hesitated. "Take care of yourself," I said, forcing the words through a throat that tightened too fast. He nodded again. "You too." And that was all. No embrace, no promise. Just a soldier walking back into war and a wife left behind in silence. After Liam left, the house returned to its usual rhythm. Only now, the silence was worse. The one person who had moved quietly through my life was gone, and I didn't even know if I missed him or the idea of him. 3 weeks after his departure, a government envelope arrived. His monthly military salary. His mother opened it eagerly, hands greedy as she counted the bills on the kitchen table. I watched from the corner, unsure if I should speak. She turned to me and said flatly, "He sent his pay." As expected, I nodded, but when I asked carefully, "Did he leave any for me? For food or the market?" She scoffed. "Why would he? You're not running a household. You don't have children. You eat here, don't you? That's more than enough." I lowered my gaze. "I just thought maybe he sent something." "He didn't," she snapped. "Don't think you're entitled to anything yet." So I said nothing more. I returned to peeling vegetables, pretending. My chest didn't feel like it was sinking. What I didn't know was that Liam had written a note in his letter to his mother. "Keep half for household expenses. Give the rest to Lisa for anything she needs." But she never showed me the letter. She folded it away in a drawer, claiming, "It's just logistics, military codes." She spent his salary on winter coal, new shoes for herself, and dry fruits. She liked to hoard for the new year. I continued using threadbare gloves and patching my old dress in secret, and still, I told myself, he doesn't care. If he did, he would have made sure I was taken care of. In the lonely dark of our cold bed, I whispered, "You left again, and I didn't even matter enough to be remembered." Miles away, on a frozen outpost where Liam crouched beside a dim fire, he unfolded a second letter, half written, half crumpled, meant for me but never finished. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it back into his coat pocket and looked up at the stars. 2 years. Seasons had come and gone, plum blossoms to falling leaves to frostbitten mornings, and Liam had not returned. There were letters at first, brief, neatly written, filled with instructions and reassurances, but never warmth. Then they slowed, one every few months, then none. His mother always opened them first. I was never sure whether she read them before I could or simply chose which parts to read aloud. Sometimes she said, "Nothing important," and tossed them into the fire after scanning them with her hawk-like eyes. I stopped asking. Liam's 2 elder brothers had married long before him. Their wives, Gia and May, had once welcomed me kindly when I was still a new bride with hopeful eyes and a red ribbon in my hair. Now they simply watched. They said nothing when Mother would insult me in front of them. Still no child after 2 years. "What use is a wife like that?" she would say as we folded laundry. They stood there, silent, their arms full of linens, their heads bowed slightly. But I saw it. That tiny flicker in their expressions. A moment of discomfort. But no defense. They never joined in. But they never stopped her. When I served dinner, my portion was smaller. My bowl chipped. If I reached for the good soy sauce, my mother-in-law would snatch it back. "Leave that for the sons who actually live here," she muttered. If I sat in the warmer corner of the courtyard, she would say, "That's for real daughters-in-law, not one whose husband ran off to the army and forgot she existed." Once, when I dared to speak back, just once, she flung the wash basin at my feet. Water soaked the hem of my dress. "I feed you, house you, let you live here like a shadow, and—" "Still you raise your voice?" she snapped. Gia looked away. May bit her lip. I turned and walked out to the well, my hands trembling, the chill in the air sinking deep into my bones. That night, I wrote Liam a letter I would never send. "Liam, are you alive? Are you warm? Do you think of me at all? Do you know what it's like to live like a ghost in your own home? They say I'm forgotten. Some days I believe them. I folded the paper and hid it under the floorboard beneath our bed, alongside 5 others like it. I didn't cry anymore. Not because I wasn't sad, but because even my tears seemed to serve no purpose now. Sometimes, I caught the wives watching me with quiet pity. But pity, I learned, is useless when it doesn't come with a voice. It started with a cough, then chills. Then a heat in my chest that burned like coal, turning my breath ragged and shallow. By the 3rd day, I couldn't stand straight without swaying. The floor seemed to shift under my feet like a boat in stormy water. I stayed in bed as long as I could, curled beneath the thin blanket. Sweat soaked the pillow. My lips cracked. My fingers shook, but the silence outside my door was louder than the coughing inside it. My mother-in-law came to the doorway once. She didn't step inside. "You'll be fine," she said, arms folded across her chest. "A little sickness is no excuse to mope. There's rice to be washed." I tried to ask for medicine, just a few coins for herbal root from the apothecary. She turned cold eyes on me. "Don't be dramatic. You've been resting all day while others work." That night, I heard her laughing with Gia and May in the kitchen. Bowls clinking, voices rising with warmth and food. No one brought me even a spoonful of broth. I lay alone, fever burning through my skin, lips whispering Liam's name in a voice I didn't recognize. By the 5th morning, my hands were too weak to wash my face, but I sat up anyway. I tied my hair with shaking fingers, wrapped my shawl tight, and opened the box beneath my bed. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk handkerchief, were 3 silver coins. The last of the savings my mother had given me before marriage. "For your dignity," she'd whispered, "in case you ever need to stand alone." I had never touched them, not even when times were lean. But today, I chose to. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I simply stepped out into the wind, each breath like a knife down my throat. The walk to the village apothecary was long, the road dusted with frost, but I held 1 coin tight in my palm, sweat and silver mixing together. The apothecary, a kind-faced old man, looked me over once and said, "Pneumonia, or close to it." He mixed a bundle of herbs, wrapped it in paper, and looked up. "You should be in bed." I gave him the coin. "I'll rest when I get home." He didn't ask more. He simply handed me the medicine and a small vial of ginger tincture for strength. The sky was a pale sheet of winter white as I walked back from the apothecary, the bundle of medicine clutched close to my chest. My steps were slow. The world felt distant, like I was moving through a half-remembered dream, until I heard my name, soft and startled. "Lisa?" I turned. There, standing by the path near the old well, was a man wrapped in a brown wool coat, with a face I hadn't seen in years, but one I had never forgotten. Chen Wei. My breath caught before the cold could. He was 3 years older than me. Once, long ago, he had carved my name into a tree behind the schoolhouse and promised to always walk me home. He had been kind, thoughtful, with laughter in his eyes and strength in his arms. But he had not been rich, and my parents, blinded by the promise of a soldier's salary and the honor of marrying into a military family, had turned him away. I lowered my gaze. "Chen Wei." He stepped closer, stopping short as he took in the sight of me. My chapped lips, hollow cheeks, the worn shawl over my thin shoulders. His voice was hoarse. "What are you doing out here like this? You're sick." I nodded slowly. "Getting medicine." "Alone?" There was no one else. His jaw tightened. I could see it, the unspoken ache in his eyes. The kind that comes not from jealousy, but from grief. He didn't speak for a moment, just watched me like he wanted to gather me in his arms and shield me from the wind, the world, everything. "I thought you'd be happy," he said quietly. "When you married into the Liu family, they said your husband was a fine man, a soldier. I thought, at least she will be cared for." I looked down at the cracked leather of my shoes. "He's been away." His eyes softened with something more than pity. "And his family?" I didn't answer. He let the silence hang for a while. Then, without asking, he took the medicine bundle from my hands. "Come, I'll walk you back." "No," I said quickly, gently taking it back. "If his mother sees, it's better if I go alone." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Pain, anger, powerlessness. Then he nodded, understanding the unspoken things. He stepped aside, but as I passed, he said so softly I almost missed it, "Lisa, if it had been up to me, I would have asked for nothing. No bride price, no conditions. Just you." I paused. My hands trembled around the medicine. The cold wind blew strands of hair across my face. "I know," I whispered, without turning back. And then I walked away. Winter stretched on, dry and bitter. I recovered slowly, my strength creeping back in small, defiant steps. But my world remained the same. Heavy silences, cold glares, and long days of work that left my hands raw and my spirit numb. Liam was still gone. His mother never mentioned him now, as if he were some soldier in a stranger's army. Gia and May had stopped asking about him months ago, and I no longer counted the days. But then Chen Wei began to appear. Not suddenly. Not with declarations or foolish hope. Just quietly. Like snow falling in the early hours, unnoticed until you step outside and find the world changed. At first, it was a loaf of warm bread left on the well's edge, wrapped in cloth with no name. Then a bundle of kindling neatly stacked outside the gate on the coldest morning of the year. I knew it was him. I recognized his still careful way of folding the corners, the way he used to pack his school books with care when we were children. One afternoon, I was returning from the market, the basket heavy in my arms. When I saw him waiting at the fork in the road, he gave a small wave. "Don't worry," he said gently, sensing my hesitation. "I won't walk you all the way. I was nearby." I gave a tired nod, and we walked together for a few minutes, just until the fields began to turn toward the village. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. Instead, he talked about his sister's new baby, the way the river had started to thaw too early this year, the price of dried tofu. He let me exist, beside him without expectation. When we reached the turn, he stopped. "I'll go back now. Thank you," I said softly. Then, unsure why, I added, "It's been a long time since someone asked nothing of me." He looked at me with such gentleness I almost turned away. "I don't want anything," he said, "except for you to know you're not invisible." That night, I boiled the bread he left into a soft porridge. It tasted better than anything we had eaten in days. I didn't tell anyone where it came from. Let them think I had begged, borrowed, or stolen. Let them believe what they wanted. But I held the bowl close to my chest and whispered, "Thank you," into the darkness. Not for the bread, but for the reminder that someone, somewhere, had once loved me not for duty, but simply for me. Spring came late that year. The plum trees bloomed and withered in the same week, their petals scattered by impatient winds. Lisa's fever had long passed, but her steps remained careful, as if her body had recovered, but her soul still limped along. Behind, Chenwei kept returning, never inside the gate, never past the point where someone might accuse, always just far enough. Sometimes he brought eggs from his sister's farm, sometimes boiled peanuts wrapped in newspaper. Once, when her fingers were cracked and sore from scrubbing, he left a small tin of balm on a stone near the back wall. Lisa said nothing, but her hands moved with more ease the next day. One afternoon, she found him mending a broken fence post near the edge of the village. "I thought this belonged to the Wangs," she said softly. "It does," he replied, hammering another nail. "But they're old, and I owed them a favor." She stayed, watched, then slowly, without meaning to, knelt beside him and began picking up fallen nails. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said after a while. "I know you're still married. I know you still wear his name." "I didn't ask you to leave," she replied, brushing her hair from her eyes. He looked at her, really looked. "You were always stronger than they thought," he said. "Even back then." Lisa smiled faintly. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was something warmer than resignation. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to," he said. "You're still here. That's enough." From that day on, she found herself walking the longer route from the market, the one that passed the edge of Chenwei's fields. Sometimes they shared a few words. Sometimes just a glance. There was no confession, no boundary crossed, but the space between them began to fill with quiet understanding. He never asked about her mother-in-law, never pressed about Liam. And because of that, Lisa began to speak more freely. Not about her suffering, but about things that still lived inside her. Memories, small thoughts, forgotten parts of herself that had no place in the Liu household. One day, they sat by the riverbank, watching the water carry petals downstream. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked. "What would have happened if—" He didn't let her finish. "I used to," he said, "but now I just wonder if you're okay." And in that moment, Lisa felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but a soft crack in the wall she had built around her heart. A place where sunlight had finally found its way through. There were moments now when Lisa caught herself smiling. Not the polite, practiced curve of the lips she used in front of Gia and May, or the guarded mask she wore under her mother-in-law's glare, but real smiles, small, sudden things that escaped before she could stop them. Usually, they came after she'd seen Chen Wei, after a quiet walk beside the fields, after he handed her a small pouch of roasted chestnuts. Because I remember you liked them when we were children. After he asked her nothing, yet made her feel more seen than anyone had in years, and each time she smiled, she felt it. The guilt. It came in waves, slow and cold. It clung to her skin, seeped into her bones. How could she smile? How could her heart stir? Her husband was alive, somewhere, still writing. Even if the letters never came to her hands, she still wore his name, still lived in his house, still served his mother, folded his clothes, prayed for his safety. And yet Chen Wei's voice stayed with her longer than Liam's memory. Some nights, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her body stiff beneath the thin quilt. The sound of the house sleeping around her, the wind pressing against the windows. She remembered Liam's face, distant now, blurred by time and distance. The strong jaw, the stillness in his eyes. A man bound by duty. She remembered their wedding. The firecrackers, the heavy red veil, the weight of her silence beside his indifference. They had never truly touched souls. Not even once. And then she thought of Chen Wei, the way he looked at her, not as someone to possess or command or ignore, but as someone who mattered. Lisa pressed her fingers to her chest, as if trying to hold something in. She had not done anything wrong. She had not spoken of love, had not betrayed, had not crossed the lines that marked honor and shame. But her heart was no longer empty. And that, perhaps, was the worst betrayal of all. She began avoiding the long path by the fields. She walked faster when she saw him from afar, not because she was angry with him, but because she was terrified of herself. One day she returned home to find Gia at the stove, stirring soup. The quiet scent of ginger and garlic filled the air. "You seem different these days," Gia said carefully. "Stronger. Like someone is lighting a fire in you again." Lisa froze. She looked at Gia, but there was no accusation in her voice, only something gentler, sadder, as if she too knew what it meant to feel like a ghost in one's own home. "I'm still Liam's wife," Lisa said softly but firmly. Gia gave a small nod. "Sometimes being someone's wife doesn't mean you're ever truly held." Lisa turned away, suddenly cold. She carried the bowl of soup to the back room, sat by herself, and tried to remember Liam's touch, Liam's voice, Liam's warmth. But there was only silence, and the ache of something unnamed blooming slowly inside her. The desert winds had changed. They no longer carried only dust and heat, but now a strange heaviness Liam could not name. It pressed against his chest in the quiet hours of dawn, when the camp was still and the sky just beginning to bleed light. For 2 years, he had not returned home, not because he had forgotten, not because he didn't want to, but because duty, sharp and endless, held him like iron chains. His unit had been deployed further west after a border skirmish. They needed men who followed orders without pause. Men who could endure. Liam endured. But he had begun to unravel inside. He wrote letters. One every month. Always with the same words. Give Lisa her share of the money. Make sure she is well. Tell her I will come home as soon as I can. But he never received a reply from Lisa. Only from his mother. Everything is fine. Lisa is quiet. Money is spent on household needs. Don't worry. At first, he believed her. After all, his mother had raised him, kept the family afloat through war and famine. But lately, something gnawed at him. He remembered Lisa's eyes on their wedding day. Not wide with joy, but stunned, like a bird just caged. He had told himself, it was normal. She was shy, young, it would pass. But she hadn't reached for him. Not once. Not even on the wedding night. And he, raised in silence, in the shadow of war and obedience, hadn't known how to reach back. Now, when he lay under the stars, rifle beside him, eyes to the endless sky, he thought not of his mother's letters, but of Lisa's absence in them. She had never written, and something about that felt wrong. One night, while patrolling the edge of the desert, a younger soldier beside him spoke of his new bride. "She writes to me every week," the boy said, grinning. "Sometimes she includes dried plum candy." Liam smiled, then looked away. He hadn't tasted plum candy since he was a boy. That night, he wrote again. Not to his mother, but directly to Lisa. He didn't know if she would ever read it. "Lisa, I don't know if my words are welcome anymore. I don't know what you've been given or denied. But I remember your silence. I remember how I failed to understand it. If I could come home, I would. I don't know what kind of man I have become in your eyes. But I still think of the way you looked at the lantern light on our wedding night, like it was the only warmth in the room. I'm trying to come back. Stay well, Liam." He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the military post with quiet hope. But when the wind picked up again, tugging at his coat, he could not tell whether it was the cold he felt or fear that it was already too late. The courtyard was quiet that afternoon, save for the slow creak of the water bucket being drawn from the well. Lisa stood barefoot on the stone tiles, washing radish greens in a cracked basin, her fingers pale from the cold water. She heard the front gate slam. A storm was coming, not of wind or rain, but of footsteps sharp and accusing. "Lisa!" Her mother-in-law's voice rang out. Lisa dried her hands on her apron, heart already heavy. The older woman stepped into the courtyard, arms crossed tightly. Over her chest, eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. "I saw you," Lisa blinked. "What?" "With that man," her mother-in-law spat. "That one who keeps passing by the back road. The one always sniffing around like a dog looking for scraps." Lisa's chest tightened. She turned her face away. "Chen Wei has done nothing wrong. Neither have I." But the accusation had already taken root. "I know his type," the older woman hissed. "He never got you, and now he's circling like a vulture. And you, walking slower when he's near, smiling like some loose girl." Lisa flinched. Her cheeks burned, not from shame, but from the injustice of it. "I have never shamed your son," she said, her voice quiet but shaking. The slap didn't come, but it hovered in the air, like thunder that hadn't yet struck. "You think I'm blind?" her mother-in-law snapped. "Liam writes of how he worries for you, how he sends money, yet you act as if he's gone from your life." Lisa looked up sharply. "He writes?" A flicker of regret passed through the woman's face, quick, then gone. "He writes to me," she said. "As he should. I raised him. You are just, a girl who never gave him anything. Not even a child, not even a warm bed on the wedding night." The words cut deeper than any blade. Lisa stood frozen, humiliated in the open air. She didn't know, couldn't know, that Liam had confronted his mother once before, quietly but firmly, after hearing of her cruelty. That he had written again to demand Lisa be cared for. And now, as the sun burned through the clouds above them, Lisa stood there, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Because she didn't know that anyone had stood for her. She believed, deeply, that Liam had forgotten her. That no one in the world would raise their voice in her name. And for the first time in a long time, Lisa's silence cracked, not into anger, but into a still, quiet grief. She turned, picked up the washed greens, and walked away, not quickly, not with fear, just with the aching weight of someone who had begun to believe her name no longer mattered. The market square buzzed with usual chatter, vendors calling prices, children weaving through baskets of sweet potatoes, old men drinking tea under the banyan tree. Lisa stood quietly at the tofu stall, clutching her basket. Her eyes were tired, her movements careful. A thin bruise colored the edge of her wrist where the water pot had slipped the day before, and her body still ached from endless chores. She didn't see the whispers begin, but she felt them. A group of village women huddled by the spice cellar, speaking in hushed tones loud enough to be heard. She's always out alone these days. No shame, even with her husband away. They say that man, Chen Wei, he's always nearby. Lisa felt. The words hit her back like stones. Still, she didn't flinch. She had learned not to. But then, suddenly, the voices stopped. Silence. And when she turned, she saw him. Chen Wei. He stood at the edge of the crowd, jaw clenched, eyes burning, not with shame, but fury. Enough, he said, loud and clear. Chit. Entire square stilled. Chen Wei walked forward, slow but steady, and stopped between Lisa and the cluster of gossiping women. "You speak so freely," he said, voice low and sharp. "But none of you saw how sick she was in winter, with no medicine. None of you lifted a finger when her mother-in-law let her waste away. None of you gave her a warm word, a kind loaf, or even shelter from the wind." He turned his gaze on them all. "And now you point fingers because I won't pretend not to care?" Lisa stared, frozen in place. "Say what you want about me," Chen Wei continued, voice rising. "But don't smear her name to feel bigger. She's done nothing but survive, day after day, in a house where kindness died long ago." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Others murmured in shock. The spice seller stepped back from her stall, and Lisa could barely breathe. Her throat burned, but no words came. Chen Wei looked at her then, not apologetically, not triumphantly, but with the solemn truth of a man who no longer cared about consequences. Then, just as quietly as he had come, he turned and left the square. Lisa stood still for a long time, the basket trembling in her arms. No one dared meet her eyes now, not out of shame, but because something had shifted. She had been invisible. Now she had been seen. And as she walked home, heart pounding in her chest, she didn't know if she wanted to cry, scream, or simply fall into someone's arms. Because for the first time, someone had spoken her name in front of others, as if it was worth defending. The letter arrived on a gray morning, folded neatly with the red military seal still pressed into the wax. The postman handed it over the gate with a respectful nod, not knowing who it was truly meant for. Madame Liu turned it in her hands, her brows furrowing as she read the front. To Lisa Liu. From Private First Class. Liam. Her lips pressed into a thin line. He had written to her, not his mother, not the one who had kept his house in order, sent the rice rations, paid the temple fees. To that girl. Lisa was out fetching water. She wouldn't even know it had come. Madame Liu shut the gate, stepped into her room, and lit the oil lamp despite the daylight. With practiced fingers, she unsealed the letter. "Lisa, I don't know if my words are welcome anymore. I don't know what you've been given or denied, but I remember your silence. I remember how I failed to understand it. I'm trying to come back. Stay well. Liam." The old woman's face darkened as she read. Her fingers clenched the edge of the page. Stay well? After all this time, after 2 years, he still thought of her. And now, with the village whispering about that man, about Lisa's walks, her smiles, her stolen glances, Madame Liu felt the ground under her power begin to shake. She reached for ink and brush. If her son wouldn't listen to silence, he would listen to scandal. Liam, I received your letter today, but it pains me to say, you wrote to the wrong person. Lisa has changed. She is not the wife you left behind. There are rumors here, ugly ones, of her being seen too often with another man, Chen Wei, a neighbor. They speak in the street. He visits when I am not looking. She walks the long path just to pass by his fields. I have remained silent out of shame. I did not wish to trouble you while you serve the country, but it has gone too far. People are beginning to talk. You must come back, quickly, before your name is dragged through the mud, and before this woman disgraces your blood. I only want to protect what is yours, Mother. She let the ink dry in the chill air, folded the letter tight, and sealed it before Lisa could return. Outside, the wind blew faintly, and a faint cough sounded from the well. Madame Lu smiled thinly. Let him come home angry. Let her fall under judgment. In the end, it was her house, her son, her name, and she would not let a girl like Lisa take any part of it. The desert wind was sharp that morning, thin and dry like old bones. Liam sat on an overturned crate just outside the command tent, scraping sand from his boots when the courier approached with a crisp envelope in hand. The moment he saw his mother's handwriting, Liam's fingers tightened. His heart rose, then fell. He unfolded the letter and read. Line by line, word by word, each sentence poured poison into his chest. Lisa has changed. Too often with another man. Chen Wei. People are beginning to talk. Come back. Quickly! The paper trembled in his hands, though his face showed no emotion. Not to the others. Not here. But something inside him cracked, silent and deep. The Lisa in his memories, the girl who flinched at harsh voices, who worked quietly through pain, who had never once asked for anything, that Lisa was now being painted as a traitor. A shame. Liam stood up without a word, walked to the operations tent, and submitted a request. Family emergency leave, 3 days. The officer looked at him strangely. Something serious? Liam only nodded. They didn't ask more. Soldiers like him, quiet, capable, obedient, rarely asked for leave. When they did, it was respected. That evening, as he packed a small bag and slung his rifle over his shoulder, his closest comrade, Lin, pulled him aside. You, okay? Liam hesitated. My house may be broken, he said simply. Then he turned and left, footsteps steady, expression unreadable. But the fire inside him was growing. He boarded the overnight truck to the railway post, barely sleeping as the landscape flashed by. From train to village cart, he traveled faster than he ever had, like a man running toward a battlefield where he didn't know the enemy. With each passing hour, the words in the letter burned deeper, not because he believed them entirely, but because he didn't know the truth. And the worst kind of pain for a soldier like Liam was not knowing what he was fighting for anymore. He clutched the letter tightly in his coat pocket, and somewhere far ahead, beyond dusty roads and cracked silence, was a girl in a cold house, unaware of the storm that was already on its way. The sky was soft with the haze of early dusk when Lisa stepped outside, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had spent the day sweeping ash from the hearth, her joints aching from the cold that crept into the bones of the house like an unwelcome guest. She needed air. She walked the narrow path beyond the edge of the village, where the wild grass still grew tall and untouched. It was a quiet place, one she found herself drawn to more often lately. And that evening, as if pulled by the same invisible thread, Chen Wei was already there. He stood beside the old mulberry tree, its leaves mostly shed for the season. In his hands was a bundle of dried herbs, things he had gathered for her cough. When he saw her, he gave a soft, uncertain smile. You came. Lisa hesitated. I Shouldn't have. But you did. There was a long silence between them, neither tense nor easy, just filled with something unspoken, something neither of them had dared to name for months. Lisa looked down. They talk. Everyone talks. I know, Chen Wei said quietly. I hear them too. You should stop defending me. It will hurt you. He stepped closer. I don't care what it costs me anymore. Lisa swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled slightly beneath her shawl. I don't know when it happened, she whispered. I was so numb for so long. And then one day, I started feeling again. Not all at once, just little pieces. When you brought medicine, when you stood up for me, when you saw me. Chen Wei looked at her as if the words alone were too much to bear. Lisa, I loved you once when we were young. I buried it because I thought you'd be happy. That was all I wanted. But seeing you like this, quiet, hurt, surviving instead of living, it broke something in me. She blinked fast, fighting tears. You don't owe me anything. I know, he said. But I want to love you again. Not out of pity, not from the past, but because I do. Still. Lisa looked at him through the fading light, her chest aching, and then, slowly, she nodded. She didn't move into his arms. She didn't speak more. But the way she looked at him, open, raw, real, was enough. For now. They stood side by side beneath the twilight sky, no longer hiding what had been growing in silence. And just beyond the hills, a train slowed at the edge of the province. Liam was almost home. The night was heavy with silence when Liam stepped off the last cart and stood at the edge of his village. He hadn't written to say he was coming. He didn't want fanfare. He didn't want explanations written with someone else's ink. He wanted to see. The lanterns were dim in the Liu household when he arrived, just a faint glow from the back room. He walked slowly up the familiar path, past the place where his father once planted bean vines, past the broken fence that had never been mended. The house hadn't changed, but something in the air had. He stepped through the front gate without a sound. The door was slightly ajar, and then he heard it. Not laughter, not weeping, just voices, close together, intimate, familiar in a way that cut deeper than raised voices ever could. He moved through the courtyard like a ghost, stopping at the outer edge of the kitchen. Through the gap in the doorway, he saw them. Lisa, sitting at the small table, her hair loose for the first time he could remember, not tied in the tight braid she always wore. Her face was calm, not the broken quiet he remembered, but something warmer, realer, and across from her, Chen Wei, leaning in just slightly, a soft look in her eyes that Liam had never seen in the house, not even from himself. Lisa reached forward and gently placed her hand over Chen Wei's on the table. Liam froze. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't scandalous. It was worse. It was affection. Open, quiet, unashamed, not the kind that bursts in passion and flames out. The kind that grows. And for the first time, Liam couldn't blame his mother, or time, or war. He had left, and someone else had filled the silence he had left behind. He backed away before they could notice. His boots scraped lightly against the stone, but neither of them turned. As he stepped back out into the dark, the wind sliced through him. He didn't know if it was betrayal or justice. But the ache in his chest told him one thing clearly. He had come back to a home that no longer belonged to him. The moon hung pale in the night sky, casting thin light across the Liu courtyard. Liam sat at the edge of the old stone well, his uniform dusty from travel, his mind louder than any battlefield he had ever stood on. Inside the house, Lisa's voice still echoed in his ears. Soft, alive. Not for him. He didn't go to his room. He didn't call her name. Instead, he waited until the old door creaked and his mother appeared, shawl tight over her shoulders, hair graying at the roots. She squinted in the dark, saw him, and froze. "Liam," she whispered, stepping forward. "You didn't tell me you were—" "I didn't want to welcome," Liam said quietly. She looked at him more closely then, sensing the sharpness in his voice. "Did you see something?" He didn't answer directly. "I saw enough." "Madam." Lou's face twitched, a flicker of discomfort. Liam's eyes didn't leave the ground. "Tell me, Mother, if your son comes home and finds that the woman he left has found warmth elsewhere, what should he do?" She didn't answer right away. The night air was still, but heavy. "I wrote you a letter," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I told you what the villagers were saying. I warned you. I didn't lie." Liam finally looked up, eyes hollow. "But you didn't tell me what you saw." His mother faltered. "I saw a girl wasting away in silence. I saw—" "You gone too long. I saw another man waiting for the chance to hold what you never did." The truth stung, even coming from her. Liam stood. Should I drag her back in shame? Force her to wear a name she no longer speaks with pride? Madame Lou's voice lowered, almost tender for the first time. No. She looked at her son, this boy-turned man, worn by duty and distance. "You asked me what you should do," she said, more gently now. "You should let her go. If she has someone else who'll love her out loud, let her have that. Don't fight for what's already slipped." "Through your fingers." Liam's jaw clenched. "So it's that easy." "No," she said. "It's never easy. But it's clean." He said nothing. The old woman touched his arm, only briefly. "You still have a life to live, Liam. Don't spend it punishing yourself. Or her." He stood there long after she went inside. The sky above him was quiet, unblinking. And for the first time, Liam realized the war he'd fought out there had ended, but the one within him was just beginning. The morning sun broke through, the clouds like gold peeling through ash. Lisa woke early, as she always did, with a dull ache in her ribs and the weight of another long day waiting. She stepped outside to fetch water from the well and stopped, her breath caught in her chest. There were footprints in the dirt, large, fresh, leading to the courtyard. But no one else had stirred. Her heart began to race. Something about them was familiar. She turned slowly toward the door of Liam's old room. It was open. Inside, the bed was untouched, but the latch on. The small trunk at the foot of it was unhooked, the same one where Liam had kept his soldier's coat and journal. It hadn't been touched in 2 years. Lisa stood frozen, the bucket forgotten by her feet. Her mother-in-law emerged then, folding a shawl. "You don't need to look like that," she said dryly. "Yes, he came. Last night." Lisa turned sharply. "Why didn't you tell me?" Madame Lou gave a shrug, her tone unreadable. "He didn't come for a meal. He didn't want a scene." Lisa's heart twisted. "Did he say anything?" The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Then, "He saw what he needed to see. He asked what he should do. I told him the truth." Lisa gripped the frame of the well. "So he knows." "Yes," Madame Lou said softly. "And he's not staying. He said nothing to shame you, nothing to fight. Just that he hopes you find peace." Tears stung Lisa's eyes before she could stop them. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Gone," her mother-in-law replied. "Didn't want you to owe him anything, not even a goodbye." Lisa turned away, trembling. She walked to the edge of the field where Chen Wei was waiting with his basket of tools. He hadn't known Liam had come either. He looked at her face, pale and shaken. "Lisa?" She looked up at him, eyes red, voice quiet. "He came. Last night. He saw us." Chen Wei's breath hitched. "And?" "He didn't stop us," she said. He let me go. Chen Wei's expression softened. He reached out and took her hand. Lisa closed her eyes. There was grief inside her. Yes. But also something else. A strange, aching kind of freedom. She had not betrayed Liam, not in anger or cruelty. She had simply lived long enough to need warmth again. And when she finally opened her eyes, she saw Chen Wei still holding her hand, still waiting. And somewhere on a long, dusty road, Liam walked alone. Not broken, just learning how to let go. The road out of the village was quiet, save for the soft crunch of Liam's boots on the dusted path. He didn't take the main road. He took the one by the river, the one fewer people used. The one he and Lisa had once walked together after their wedding night, both silent, both unsure of how to begin a life neither had chosen. Now it felt like the only road left for him. His pack was light, his uniform wrinkled. He'd removed his badge of rank, tucked it away in the side pocket of his bag. For now, he was not a soldier. Just a man walking away from something he could not fix. The cold wind stung his face, but inside, he was numb. He thought of Lisa's hands, how they had once trembled when she poured his tea, how they had grown steady over time, even without kindness from him. He remembered the look in her eyes when he left for the last mission, how she didn't cry or hold him, but just stood there as if already used to being left behind. And now, he'd left again this time from the shadows. She hadn't seen him, and maybe it was better that way. He reached the small bend where the river curved and a voice called from behind. Liam! It was his mother, catching up to him with surprising speed for her age. She clutched a basket in one hand, out of breath. You'll just leave like this? Without a proper goodbye? Liam paused, turned, but said nothing. She came closer, looking at him carefully. You did right. You didn't cause a scene. You showed restraint. But this isn't the end of your life. He lowered his gaze. His mother continued gently. You're still young. You can marry again. I know a family in the next county. Decent girl, educated, respectful. You don't have to stay tied to someone who's already moved on. Liam's throat tightened. I don't want another wife, he said quietly. You don't have to decide now. I've already decided, he said. Louder this time, his eyes fixed on the river. I loved her, even when I didn't know how to show it, even when I failed her. His mother's face fell. You never said anything. I didn't know how, he murmured. And by the time I did, someone else already had. The silence between them stretched like thread on a loom, fragile, ready to snap. Madame Liu shifted uncomfortably. So, you'll spend your life alone, for a woman who didn't wait? Liam looked at her, and for the first time, there was no anger in his face. Just quiet sorrow. I'm not punishing myself. I'm just being honest. He turned away then, adjusting the strap on his bag. Please don't write again. Not about her. Not about marriage. His mother didn't stop him. She stood there as he walked on, his figure growing smaller against the pale morning sky. And Liam, scarred not by war, but by silence, love, and time, walked forward carrying nothing except the memory of what he had loved too late. Spring came gently that year. The frost thawed earlier than usual, and the peach trees bloomed with soft pink petals that floated across the courtyard like whispers. The air smelled of earth, of something living again. Lisa stood by the window of her new home, simple, warm, built with Chen Wei's careful hands and quiet patience. The rice soup was simmering on the stove. In the distance, Chen Wei could be heard feeding the chickens, softly humming a folk song she used to know as a girl. It was a good life. Steady, honest, kind. And yet, as Lisa watched the petals drift on, the wind A name stirred in her chest like a ripple over still water. Liam. She didn't speak his name aloud anymore, not even to Chen Wei, who knew the truth of it without needing words. But sometimes, in moments like these, when the light fell a certain way across the floor, or a coat hanging by the door reminded her of a faded uniform, she remembered. Not with longing, not with guilt, but with a quiet ache. She remembered how Liam used to come home in the dead of night and sit on the step, smoking silently. She remembered how he never touched her without asking, but never asked either. She remembered how his eyes seemed more tired than cruel, and how he once left a folded handkerchief on her table when she had a cold, saying nothing. He had been distant, conflicted, but she had known, deep down, that there had been a thread of feeling in him he didn't know how to name. Now she wondered if he ever forgave her, if he hated her, or if, like her, he simply carried a piece of the past in the quiet folds of his days. Chen Wei came in then, brushing hay from his sleeve. "Soup's burning," he said, his smile warm and crooked. Lisa blinked, startled. "Oh, yes." She stirred the pot, flustered, and he wrapped his arms gently around her waist from behind. "You're somewhere else again," he murmured. She didn't lie. "I was just remembering." Chen Wei was silent for a moment. Then he kissed her temple and said softly, "I know." Lisa leaned back into him, her eyes misting, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. Not everyone gets a second love. Not everyone loses the first so quietly. And not everyone learns to carry both. As the peach blossoms swirled outside, Lisa ladled the soup into 2 bowls, setting them down at the table she now called her own. And in the corners of her heart where shadows still lingered, she lit a quiet candle for the man she had once waited for, and for the one who never asked her to. The barracks had changed over the years, new coats of paint, new recruits with younger faces and louder laughter. But some things hadn't. The discipline, the silence of early mornings, the sound of boots marching in sync. And Liam. He was no longer the hesitant young man with dust on his collar and questions in his eyes. Now, soldiers stood when he entered. His uniform bore more stars than most could dream of earning. Promotions had come one after another, not because he asked for them, but because he never left, never faltered, never hesitated. He was called Captain Liu, and no one dared call him anything else. He had a reputation, unshakable, disciplined, unreadable. He never raised his voice. He never smiled. His orders were law, and his loneliness, though invisible, walked beside him like a second shadow. Once, a nurse stationed at the outpost tried to speak with him, twice. Soft-spoken, kind-eyed. She brought him tea, once stayed late in the infirmary just to see if he needed anything. He thanked her politely, then ignored every attempt after. Another time, a high-ranking officer's niece was introduced at a ceremony. "Pretty girl," the others said. "Well-mannered, educated, perfect for someone like you." Liam nodded. "She'll make a fine wife for someone," and walked away. They said he was married to the army, that he had given up personal joys for patriotism, that he had sacrificed for honor. But only Liam knew the truth. Every night, when the lights were out and the dormitory was silent, he would sit at the corner desk in his private quarters and unlock the small compartment in his satchel. From it, he would pull out a folded photograph, worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded. Lisa. In that picture, she wasn't smiling. But her eyes were soft, uncertain, the way they'd been on their wedding day, like she didn't know what the world held, but she still hoped to be loved in it. He never showed the photo to anyone. He never spoke her name again. But every long march, every night drill, every victory pin he received, he carried her with him, not as a burden, but as the piece of his life he had once been too silent to protect. Years passed. Gray began to streak his hair. his back stiffened with age. Yet the younger soldiers never dared ask why their captain never married, never drank, never left his post on holidays. Only once, in a quiet conversation with a trusted junior officer, did he offer anything at all. "Did you ever love someone, sir?" the young man asked. Liam's hand paused over a document. His eyes flicked up. Then, after a moment of stillness, he said, "Yes, I did." And that was all. The soldier nodded, sensing it was not a story meant to be told. And Liam returned to his writing, sharp, precise, emotionless. But that night, as always, when the silence returned to him, he unfolded her photo once more and remembered a life that had bloomed only briefly, then stayed alive in the heart of the man who never smiled again. The telegram arrived on a rainy morning. Captain Liam, deceased, in active duty, buried with honors. No one in the village wept out loud. But when Lisa read the name, something inside her stilled, like the quiet after thunder. She had not spoken of Liam in years. Life had moved on. She had a home now, filled with laughter and the chatter of 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl with her eyes. Chen Wei loved her as quietly and completely as a man could, and she loved him in return. But still, she folded the telegram and told Chen Wei, "I need to go." He didn't ask why. He simply nodded. Liam's old home hadn't changed much. The wood creaked the same, and the courtyard still held that single crooked tree. Madame Lu, now older and slower, opened the door. For a moment, she stared in shock. Then, she stepped aside. Lisa entered, her eyes sweeping over the house she once lived in, where love never bloomed, but roots were still planted. "I came to pay respect," she said simply. Madame Lu stared at her for a long moment before sinking slowly onto a stool. "I never thought you'd come," the old woman said. Her voice was thinner now, not cruel, just tired. "I suppose it's time." Lisa tilted her head. "Time for what?" "For truth." Madame Lu reached for a box on the nearby shelf. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Neatly folded, all addressed to Lisa. Unopened. "He wrote to you," Madame Lu said. "Often. He sent money too. Every month. Said to give you half." "I never did." Lisa's breath caught. She picked up a letter and slowly opened it. Liam's handwriting greeted her, firm, restrained. One line stood out. "I hope she's warm. I hope she eats. I hope she still sings when no one is listening." Tears filled Lisa's eyes. "I told him you were having an affair before it even began," Madame Liu confessed. "He asked me what to do. I told him to let you go, so he did." Lisa sat down, letters in her lap. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because he's dead," the old woman said softly. "And because he never stopped loving you, even when he didn't know how to keep you." Silence filled the room. Lisa looked down at the final letter in the stack. The paper was older, worn. She opened it. If she is happy, then let her go. That is all I ask. Let her be happy. Lisa smiled through her tears. "He did let me go," she whispered, "and I am happy." Madame Liu lowered her head. "Then I suppose he did one thing right." Lisa stood. "I forgive you," she said gently. "But I can't mourn what I already let go of." And with that, she walked away, letters pressed to her heart like a closed chapter of an old book. Years passed. Lisa's children grew. Chen Wei never asked what was in the letters, and she never told him. But some nights, when the house was quiet and the stars were out, she took out a notebook and wrote, not a diary, a story. This story, of a girl named Lisa, of a soldier named Liam, of a love that came too late, and a life that still bloomed after. She ended the story with a single line. Some loves are meant to be lived, others are meant to be remembered. And in writing it, Lisa finally laid the past to rest, with grace, with sorrow, and with peace. The attic was filled with dust and silence. Yunhua, Lisa's daughter, now in her 20s, ran her fingers across the old wooden chest her mother used to keep locked. After her mother's passing, Chen Wei had told the children, "Take what reminds you of her, but leave what weighs too much." Yunhua opened the chest carefully. Inside, among old photographs and pressed flowers, lay a worn notebook, its pages yellowed but neatly bound with a red ribbon. The first page simply read, "The Story of Lisa." She sat down by the window, the sunlight catching strands of her mother's elegant handwriting. As she read, the world around her stilled. She saw a young woman in red on a wedding day that felt more like mourning. A cold soldier with warm thoughts he never said. An old house, a bowl of untouched soup, a pair of hands that worked through pain, and a goodbye never spoken, but always understood. Tears spilled freely. Her mother had never told them. Not about Liam. Not about the letters. Not about the ache she carried with such quiet strength. Yunhua saw now. Her mother had not just lived a life. She had lived many. By the end of the story, Yunhua was holding the notebook like it was something sacred. She looked out the window, the wind rustling through the peach trees, then she smiled softly. "I'll share it, Mama," she whispered. Weeks later, an online post went up on a modest blog site, titled, "The Soldier's Wife, A True Story." It didn't trend, it didn't go viral, but those who read it remembered. Comment after comment appeared. I cried. "This is real love, painful, but real. Thank you for sharing her life." And in a quiet corner of the internet, Lisa lived again, this time in the hearts of strangers. Not as a victim, not as a heroine, but as a woman who had loved, endured, and forgiven. Yunhua printed the story and placed it on a shelf in her room, beside a framed photo of her mother and Chen Wei smiling in the garden. And beside it, a smaller, older photo, one of a man in uniform, solemn-eyed, never smiling, but finally remembered.